Hello, everybody. So this is Game Tray's first designer diary. We've got Tim with Fowers Games, and of course Noah, the owner, designer extraordinaire of Game Trayz.
Hello.
Hey.
So the first general question I wanted to ask you guys real quick, and I'm Derek, I work for Game Trayz, is Tim, how would you explain Paperback Adventures?
I mean, I can describe it, and it's a lot of words that you just don't hear together. So yeah, solo, deck building, roguelike, word game, and people are on usually till the second or third word, and then they're like, I'm not on the bus
Roguelike,
anymore.
maybe?
Like, I don't
Maybe a
know what
roguelike?
when you say those words, I don't know what you mean.
The one
So,
that got me was the word building. I was like, what is I know what a deck building is, but I don't think I've heard the mechanic of word building before.
well, yeah, I try to make the distinction between as a spelling game, to differentiate it from word games like code names and whatnot. So yeah, word building in that sense. It's like you're putting together a word similar to Scrabble, Boggle, in that vein. But I mean, it's built on the bones of Paperback, which is, I made in 2013 and is, continues to be really popular. But Sky Larson, who's the co-designer on it, big word game fan, and he kind of, we did a little digital prototype because we make video games too. We made a little digital prototype, and then he took it, and we kind of were done with it. We're like, this isn't really working. He's like, can I take that and maybe I'll work on a physical game with that. And so he took it and he came back with us like the splaying system. And the way it works in the game is, if you know splaying from the game Innovation, where you put cards underneath each other in a certain order where only a portion of the card of each card underneath is showing. And he came up with a system where if you splay one way, you get one set of symbols showing. And if you splay the other way, you get another set of symbols. And initially he came back and he's like, oh, what if it was like magic versus attack and whatnot? And then we started to look at like what we're shooting for, which is like a Slay the Spire, dungeon-y crawl thing.
Yeah.
And we discovered that it was like a when you play that game, you really want to have to choose between offense and defense. And so then that was the nugget of the game, was like, okay, you have to figure out how you're going to play your hand. And we had the core of it, and the rest of it kind of built on top of that. But that's like the kernel of what it became. And to us, it doesn't seem that weird because we've been along for the whole ride. We're like, oh, this is just what makes sense when you want to put these things together. But there's a little bit of sticker shock when it comes to new gamers, or like, what does this mean and whatnot. But I mean, we really like to do innovative things. We like to do things in a new way and come up with systems to support new types of games and new types of gameplay. So yeah, and so far, I mean, testing and everything has gone really well. Everyone's having a really good time with it, and it's almost surprised us, the response to both the testers and the campaign.
The campaign is doing really well. I think the best description I heard from somebody was something like Scrabble, right? So like your typical kind of word-based game, something along those lines, where you're using all these words, which are cards, to spell out a word, and then you mix in something like Slay the Spire, which is that deck building video game where, as you go along, you're unlocking new abilities, you're adding new things to your deck, and the way you play your cards makes a huge difference. So I like that kind of marriage of those two things together in a proper board game.
Another big part of development was figuring out efficiencies, and this goes into how we ended up with the Trayz situation. So the problem is, if you look at a game like Slay the Spire, is bookkeeping. You're like, okay,
yeah, there's too many combinations.
Well, it's just like the enemy has 30 health. Okay, we got to count down from that much health. I have health, and so it's like I have all these different stats that I'm keeping track of, and also you get into these like these buffs and debuffs. It's like, okay, I have this curse on me, so I'm taking extra damage, but he has this other curse on him that multiplies it by 1.25. And like very quickly, these games under the hood are very, very mathy, which is very not fun for a board game to be. We call it bookkeeping, to like the amount of math you have to do to kind of solve your turn.
Right? Yeah, you don't want to spend 15 minutes just to take one turn.
Yeah. So we granted, this is way more complex than the original Paperback, but we kind of focused on a few things that we wanted to track. And our initial plan was like, okay, we'll have health, and then we'll have mana or energy, and then we have curses and boons. Like let's go around these 4 stats. Enemies only use 3 stats, and like we had it all worked out, and we go to Noah, and we're like kind of like just getting like, okay, we know these are the stats we want. This is what we want to track. We want it to look like a novel, like because we have these novel covers. It's all themed around the kitschy pulp novels, and we have these piles of cubes. It's like, okay, pile of health cubes, or you could reverse it and show damage, and we had a pile of mana, and we had boons, and we have all these piles of cubes, and we're like, okay, this is like, is there a way you can make a track for these, or to put all the cubes in or whatever? And I don't know, maybe Noah, you can take it from here.
Yeah, I mean, like, who wants 14 piles of cubes around every cardboard piece on the actual table when you're playing a game? You have to like have different stacks and different piles of, right?
Yeah.
So we came up with the idea of a track, and if we can combine the tracks into one track, basically that's where this design came from.
Okay, so let's take a look at what an example of that would look like. So I'm going to actually add your screen in here, Noah. All right, so here's some of the different prototypes. So on the left, we have, this is going to be the hero board, correct? And then on the right is the monster board?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so what all are these boards actually tracking besides just like generic health?
Well, so I mean, the white is the health, and that's kind of the most important. It's like if you run out of health or they run out of health, that determines who wins, because it's a classic like battle. But these other ones like mana, it's usually in like a 1 to 5 range. Boons are like in the 1 to 4 range. They don't get too high, and then hexes. So we have different stats that we want to track, and we end up with all these piles. And even in Tabletop Simulator, which we were using for testing, it was annoying to like, okay, keep pulling these over. And now we're just like, oh, this sliding thing. And Noah had suggested this because he had done it previously, and we're like, oh, and it totally changed our box design and everything, because we're like, oh, this is clean, this isn't overwhelming, and
right,
the
thing was that we want to use the same tray for the hero and the monster, that was the challenge of figuring out how we can use the same tray for both because of mold costs and things like that. So
So Fatal says it kind of reminds them of the trays in Eclipse. I was thinking of the aftermarket trays you made for Terraforming Mars. Where did you get the original idea for those aftermarket trays for Terraforming Mars, and then which led to, I would believe, a product like this?
Yeah, so the Eclipse is actually one of the ones that was before this one with the stacking sliders, but Terraforming Mars also changed a tray where you can track multiple things and not have things move around. Because with the Terraforming Mars, you have a little player mat that's flat, and everything moves around if you touch it for.
Yeah, they're not cat proof. One cat jumps up on the table and everything gets spilled.
And the same thing with the original Eclipse. The same thing happens where you line up 1,000 cubes on your little player mat, and you bump it, and then done. Yeah, see, he's got the cat.
Speaking of cats, yeah, and you've got a dog in your lap.
Cat-sized dog.
I'm like, I have nothing in here. I could call a dog, but it's quite large, so.
Yeah, so like, how do we combine all this? We don't have to have a bunch of cubes and also keep things from moving around if you bump the table or a cat jumps up, right? So yeah, the Eclipse second edition, when I worked on that, we came up with the idea of these sliders in addition to having them be able to stack. So being able to have the same track counter on the same number. They can stack up, they can move around, and they won't move. And then you can also put them off to the side if it's a 0 or you're not using that one. And then in addition, having the same tray be useful for vertical, horizontal, and different aspects of the gameplay, right, Tim?
Yeah.
Because
So
the monster has different things.
Yeah. So the we had some other takes on it where we're like, how do we, because so the monster has 4 attacks that it's just going to cycle through, and 1 to 4, right? And an aha moment just like not very long ago was that like, okay, the monster doesn't use mana, so what if we took the same mana tracker that the player is using, because they don't use that action intent tracker, on the bottom, and then for the monster, it now indicates what action they're going to do, and it's just like, oh, well then we can use the same set of pieces, and it had an elegance to it where it's like, oh, this is great. And even just it helped us organize our boards and like where we put the information on the board and whatnot to make it very readable. um, and and we kind of, I forget where we came up with the original size. It was 3.5 by 5, and so we kind of like, when I'm working with Noah, it's like we kind of work from the inside out. It's like, okay, how big? He's like, okay, how big is the enemy card? And we're like, okay, it's 3.5 by 5.
Mhm.
And then we had to think through, like, one thing is initially we were going to have numbers on the outside of the card, right? So that we could, but then then the counters were kind of overlapping cards because these cards have to flip. So it's another consideration. So we're like, oh, we don't really want it to overlap the card. It's okay if the action does, but the other ones, we want to keep their boons and their counters when they flip.
Because every time this particular monster levels up, I guess you would call it.
Well, when you get it down to 0, it flips and then it gets more health. It's like second
so
final form.
You have to flip the card, and it has a certain amount of new abilities and a different amount of health that you have to reset. So if all of the trackers similar to the blue one over here, that's indicating what power it has, if all of these counters were overlapping the cardboard, then you had to flip it up. You had to pull them off and put them back on and remember where it was.
Yeah.
So they do have like a threshold where once you hit like a certain point, they actually flip over and become like even harder to beat at that point.
Yeah. And this goes into the bookkeeping problem where it was like, counting to 30 is kind of a pain. But if we can split the health between two sides, you're never really doing math. It's more than
that helps, because anything over 20, I'm out.
Yeah. So it just it cleaned it up, and it allowed for these reversible cards. And so he's like, well, we could put the numbers in the tray. I'm like, would we have to do stickers? He's like, oh no, well, if you get this certain density of plastic, it can actually show the numbers in the plastic. And I'm like, oh, so like this is one of the things where what's really worked well in our relationship is I kind of make sure I'm communicating my design constraints and my design goals to Noah. And then he's just got these bag of tricks where he's just like, oh, what this thing is. And like, oh, that is the perfect thing that I was looking for.
Right. Yeah, so
he does have a lot of tricks. I like the printing on the trays. Like Dwellings of Eldervale also did that. And it was really helpful when the tray itself, the organization itself, helps you with the game, like you said, the bookkeeping.
Yeah, exactly. And there are certain things you can and cannot do with engravings, we call it, in the tray, because the mold and the plastic, has certain thickness, and you have to take into account how the plastic will form around different engravings of numbers and stuff, and some colors show up better than other colors of plastic, and you have to, account for different thicknesses. So it's not for everything, but for numbers like this, it works well on certain color plastics, and we've done it before on different things. And the trackers themselves, those are injected mold. So
for clarification, Meeple Moose was asking, Meeple and the Moose, when the track would have to overlap itself, how does this tray actually work with that? Is there ever a point in time where the two trackers would actually cross each other or overlap each other?
Yeah, you can see in this picture here on the two. So this is
boom.
What are these colors?
That's that's a boon counter and a hex counter.
Okay, so they are two separate ones, so they can actually stack on top of each other, or they can be separate spots on the track at the same time.
So you can see this little hole here in the top. That is the same size as the part that's underneath the tracker that goes into the track.
Okay.
That goes around. So that's the part that inserts into the track, and then that same part will insert in top of any of the other trackers. You could actually stack 4 high on a single number if you need it. And they are next to each other.
The other thing was like we run into this problem of like very often you have 0 of something, and we're like, okay, do we add 0 to the track? But then that means that like, okay, then they're all going to get stacked at the 0. Like you just have to think through everything, right? And so
you don't have to, but you guys clearly did.
So what he did is it's like, oh, we'll just have these storage slots where you can store it down below when it's 0, and then it's out of the way, and it's also very clear that and it's just like solutions, right? It's just like he suggests things, and And it helps. It's like I can usually follow him because he's mocking stuff up, and I can handle like some of this spatial stuff. It's gotten really crazy with some of our boxes where we're like, okay, it transforms in this way, and we have to kind of like talk through it. But you have to, doing a lot of mock-ups in the process has been super useful. And he does like the rapid prototyping. He's like, he can usually do what you're talking about pretty quickly, and then you can just like see what it looks like or see how that fits together.
Virtually, prototype.
Yeah. So it and then
it's the same
we
tray,
were gonna have
as
a
you can
different
see,
counter.
right?
What?
This is the
Right, this is the hero
tray.
version.
Same
Yeah.
tray, but just portrait style. And
I like that too. So you can, when you look at it, you immediately know which one's the hero, which one's not. With this game, I know that there's multiple different heroes. How many trays are you actually getting? Are you getting like one monster tray and one hero tray, or does it depend on how you back the Kickstarter?
Yeah, so it was actually just a recent, based on feedback, and that we developed a 2-player variant. Is that we were going to need more trays. So like this weekend,
Noah's like, yes, more trays.
I go to Noah and I'm like, okay, is there any way we can get 4 trays? Because I'm like, okay, will they fit together? And he was like giving me tolerances, like, okay, it's gonna be about this thick. So we're running the math. We're like, okay, how is that gonna fit in the core box? How do we get 4 trays in the core box? Get enough tokens for them and all this stuff. And then I'm like, okay, well, how do we, and then
bigger box, always just a bigger box.
Well, I like to be efficient, and for this one we weren't doing it because it's a modular game. We want people, because you only need to play the game. You only need the core box and one character. Like that's all you pull off the shelf is those 2. You don't need the other boxes because it's a solo game. But for this, to get enough trays in the game, we're like, well, then we started talking about what color they were, and then I'm like, well, what if we just had a tray per character, and then we could do injection molding of the color so it could kind of match that character. And then if we changed the boxes, which means we have to change all the character boxes, which before were designed to hold just cards, similar to Paperback box. Like, okay, if we change those boxes to fit a tray, and we put a tray in each box, so there's an enemy one that's red, and then each hero gets one, we can finally get to enough trays to do this, what's called double trouble, where it's two player characters versus 2 enemies, and have enough tracking for all that to go on. And
okay,
2 actual players.
So now when you pull one of the character books off the shelf, it's going to have its own tray already in the box. So if you want to play 2 players, you're just going to grab 2 of those character boxes, and then you're just good to go.
Yeah. So and then we had to run the tolerances. Like, okay, what else is in the box? How do we fit those things in? What are the new dimensions? And can we get a unified box that is so the core box and all the character boxes are using the same shape box, so they all can fit nicely on the shelf together. And so like we built out all these, and as we're working through this, like Noah's mocking it up, and we're figuring out how this works. And then I'm this literally this last Sunday, and so by Tuesday we were able to get the new renders and pivot into this kind of better, and it was better overall. It helped in every way to do this kind of pivot, even though it was mid-campaign. It's going to be a better product overall. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, it makes it easier. Anyone who follows me and the content that I do, is it's always 2 players. So the ability to make it either solo or kind of do like that 2 at the same time, I think really opens it up from obviously just solo players to like couples, or people that have a friend that also wants to play, because then you can play with them, show them the game, kind of play it cooperatively. I like that aspect.
Well, my initial theory on the game was like, I'm like, well, word game fans don't always have friends that want to play word games. So I'm like, I'll make a solo game for those word gamers.
I really
Scrabble
I want
with
to play
friends
Scrabble.
is like the #1 app. Like, we have friends.
Well, there's always the guy that's like really good at Scrabble, and like
that's fair.
And he's way above everyone, and no one wants to play him.
That's my stepmom. Yeah, we call her on the phone, and I'm like, "Hey, is this a word?" She's like, "No, that's not a word. Stop calling me."
So, but it turns out that that the people really wanted to have that experience. So we have 2 different variants. One of them requires the multiple trays. One of them is more like you're co-opting. You're 2-headed giant. You're playing the same character, but you each have your own kind of kit, and you're taking turns. So and I mean, from the design side, I actually pushed back several times when like Sky and Jeff Krause, who were helping me develop it, they're like, "Oh, we need to figure out how to make two people a two-player mode." And I'm like, "No, not yet, not yet, not yet," because it's like we wanted to be solo first, where it's like we have the best solo experience, and then I'm like,
Okay.
then we'll explore the two-player because, I don't know if you know the story of the F-35 in the military. If you try to make a plane for everyone, you make a plane for no one.
Yeah. It's very similar to like the Bradley fighting vehicle where it started as one thing and then everybody wanted, let's add a gun to it. And it just becomes this mess that is no longer usable for any group. So
yeah. So that was things. We kept focus on solo really until we got very close to the Kickstarter. And so we've recently been doing testing with this two-player stuff, knowing the constraints of like, okay, we this is how the solo works now. And so we don't lose anything from the solo experience. We didn't have to change anything. We really just had to figure out in what ways can it scale to two players. So it was a great pivot, and in the end, it's going to be it's a better product all around. So,
well, one of the questions I got asked earlier, at this point in time, when working with Game Trayz, it's just going to be these trays. There's not going to be any kind of organizational tray from Game Trayz, correct?
We'll see.
Oh,
we'll see how the
guess.
box is organized. I mean, if we need it for box organization, we might do that.
Never know. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I assumed there wasn't. I didn't mean to spill any secrets here live.
No, we're just because it's like with stretch goals and stuff, and we have to see how it all fits in the box, and if we need some more help there, then
it's like a legitimate stretch goal. I mean, because we haven't talked about it, and if it happens, it happens.
Yeah, you can't let Noah get his hooks in you. He shows you one amazing plastic tray, and the next thing you know, the whole thing's plastic. It's that guy.
Cards.
It'll solve everything.
I was working for him for 3 months before I actually knew I was hired. You can't let him get his hooks in you for sure.
So
yeah. Go ahead. I was gonna say, so I know that you've got Paperback Adventures, and then you've got a lot of other games that you make because you make video games, you make other games. Like, what other games have you done with Game Trayz? Because I know you did want to talk about that at some point in time.
What games haven't you done with Game Trayz? I guess maybe that's
don't say that because we don't want people buying those games.
So did we do something before Sabotage? Sabotage was the first one.
No, I think it was.
I think Sabotage was the first.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was something where we approached Game Trayz. Yeah, it was actually mid-campaign. We started talking, and we're like, okay, I didn't want to waste all. I mean, I was trying to do like a Captain Sonar type situation where we're like, okay, we need this barrier between these two sides, and instead of just like, leaving it to be our problem, Noah's just like, well, okay, what if you put this tracker that is an embedded tray on inside, in a hole in the box on the top that both players can see. I'm like, oh yeah, that solves our problem with like visibility because there's certain information that both teams needed, and we put this little tracker tray. But then he made like a whole render for that, and we were able to put it on the campaign page, and it was just like, it solved. It was a perfect fit. And then as we went through development on Sabotage, he engineered these corners that actually give a huge amount of structural integrity to the box. So it's like a freaking DeLorean, like gull wing doors that come open, and it's very strong at the same time. And he's just like, yeah. And then we had to figure out, okay, how do we get those 45-degree angles to still not collide with each other and not collide with the tray on top. And there's all these configurations, and he's able to just like squirm his way around things. He's always able to do like this T1000 where he just fits around the. So that was that went really well, and then we had all the organization stuff for that.
Well, that makes sense because Burgle Brothers 2 kind of has a similar, like, the box is part of the overall game itself. You don't just take out Burgle Brothers, dump it on the table, and then throw the box to the side.
Yeah. So, and again, I involved Noah. This time I involved Noah even earlier because I'm like, everyone really likes. It's a 3-dimensional game.
Even earlier, maybe not mid-campaign.
Yeah, not mid-campaign.
A week.
And he came up with this, again, like this, like we wanted the profile of the box to be, because we don't really like that 12 by 12 big box when we don't have to. We had to for Sabotage, but I'm like, I'd like to get it down, but I still want to be able to have this table that you can elevate and you can play this 2-floor scenario. So he came up with this with the trays to hold them and the supports, and it was like it was pretty next level. And China always hates us too, because we're just like, okay, the manufacturer, we're like, okay, you need to do this way. So that's the only fault, is like usually it's like we design it, but getting the right manufacturer and giving the manufacturer enough time to deal with these really innovative boxes and what, because they're used to like, why are you doing a normal box? And we're like, well, because we want to do something new, and so we've been pushing the envelope with all this.
That's
But
fair.
and that's the other thing is I totally recommend other companies. It's like, Noah's not just a tray designer. He's an industrial engineer. Like you can engineer an entire table presence, and even thinking outside the trays, and how can your box be involved? Because if you can reuse your box, you're making a box anyway. Like if you can make it functional,
Part of the game.
yeah. Oh, and this is So this is my I had all these LEDs and whatnot, because I wanted the
blinged
casino
out
look.
copy.
Yeah, I was pretty proud of that.
Yeah, so
I mean, once
these are
we did
clear, these are
transparent
just clear
supports, I was
cubes.
like, I'm totally putting lights in the supports. So
Yeah, I had to pull this picture up because I shared this one on social media, because when I saw this, I was like, okay, that's next level. You really feel like you're in a casino. I can smell the smoke, and I'm already looking on the ground for poker chips that people might have dropped. So I liked what you added to it, and that the box itself becomes such a huge part of the game.
yeah. So it's been a blast. It's like, I love this stuff. I mean, my story, is like growing up. I mean, no one it might be have the same nostalgia, but I when I was a kid, I was 5 years old, and I really wanted Transformers, and we couldn't afford them.
I had a
or
friend that
whatever.
had all the Transformers, and I was like, no Transformers.
You hang out at
There's
his
more
house.
than meets the eye. They're perfect toy.
Well, but it was just like, the transformation just messed with your, as a kid, you're just like, it's a car and a robot, So I took I took craft supplies, and I actually started building. I had a little thing on how to make a cube, right? And then like a little paper craft cube, and then I extrapolated, and I'm like, okay, if I make these sides longer, it'd be longer, and I can make hinges, and I built fully functional Transformers, because I was a poor kid, and so this totally scratches that itch. Like developing these boxes and doing all this innovative stuff with Noah, really, brings me back to like, solving these problems and being resourceful with what you have, and innovating, out of drive and necessity. So.
And that's why I love working with Tim, because he lets me do even more than what I do with most publishers.
Yeah, he has way
A
too
lot of
much
publishers let
trust.
me do a lot of stuff that they're not comfortable with, because I'm like, you do this, you can do this, you can like, oh wow. But Tim's like, just design everything, make a box into a table, sure.
Well, I like
whatever.
his design philosophy, right? He's got an overall picture of his game for sure, and then he basically gives you a box, and he says, okay, you've got some cardboard and some plastic, make this transform. And that's a really good way of putting it, where the
I think
box
actually,
is
now
part
that
of
I
the game.
remember now, I think I made Transformers myself as a kid. You're bringing
Yeah.
back
Yeah, I just
memories,
had Ninja
Tim. I didn't
Turtles.
remember
I guess I am the odd man out here with
No,
like,
you're a couple years old. A
Yeah,
couple
you're
years
a little
younger.
bit, you're younger.
it's like that 5 years made a huge difference.
Yeah.
It really did. It really did.
It
That's
was it was
fair.
G.I. Joe, He-Man, and Transformers were just
All
like
right.
right
I
there.
mean, I watched them too, but yeah, I just Ninja Turtles is
Yeah,
always
it
my
was-
And
thing.
that's why the Transformers movies were such a disappointment for me and Tim. It was like, this isn't what we signed up for.
I mean, to be
Well,
fair, once they putting out a movie like 20 years later, I mean, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Michael Bay ones weren't exactly amazing either. I was
well,
roll over, go to sleep style for me. I was like, I'm
okay. So
done.
what is amazing about a Transformer isn't the car or the robot. It's the
Mhm.
transformation,
Yeah.
and how that it, like, you can see both of them, and you're trying to figure out how it does the thing, and they took all of that elegance out of with the movies, because they're just like,
Yeah, it was fast.
it's aluminum
No,
foil
no.
ball, and then it's whatever you need it to be. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
it was just
it's like if it followed like spatial rules of like, oh, okay, his hood comes over this way and then it fits here, and then it's just like, oh, that's so elegant because that's really the design behind it.
And then a little
Um,
head pops out from the
yeah.
stomach
yeah,
of the
yeah,
car.
and in the toy, it had to follow rules, and I got some that are just like super interesting. Even when they did Beast Wars, they made one where this T-Rex, his one hand is the head of the T-Rex, and the other one is the tail, and it opens up, and it's asymmetric transformer. Like,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I can gush about this stuff because it's like that kind of, and so that's what we're doing here is transformer
Electric
boxes
transformers.
and
Yep. Mhm.
So
yeah.
now that Paperback Adventures is done, right? It's funded, all the hard work is done. There's nothing you really need to do for it anymore. Is the next game going to be a Transformers game?
No, well,
I
I
feel
don't know.
like we've done Transformers games already. I mean,
I mean, that's
some
true. That's true.
Transformers.
But
I
do you
mean, it
need
just
them
needs to make
talk?
the sound when it transforms.
Yes, exactly. And I have
Can you
a few
add? Well, I
games that
mean, they
have
did do
audio.
sound bases in Dwellings of Eldervale, so like now you can add sounds to this. Like when the box
Yeah,
opens,
yeah.
it goes.
Yeah,
Yeah, so,
Gloom of Thrones is the one game that I did, and if you open the box, it has a sound effect as you open the box.
Yeah, that's like a Game of Thrones game, right? So wouldn't it just be like,
Gloom
"Bleh."
of
Oh, see,
Thrones.
here's now I
Gloom of
have my
Thrones.
cat here. So all
Ah,
right, we're all
oh,
representing,
finally.
except mine's way more mischievous and will bust up the camera.
so
Any other questions from people or what?
yeah.
It seems like everybody just is excited about everything more than anything else. There were some questions about
You're
like the
so good at
trackers and
explaining your
different
stuff, no
things,
one has
but
questions.
oh, here we go. Here's what we're talking about. Burgle Brothers 3, the transformative heist, where you've got to go in, somehow you have to transform. I mean, Jet Li could do it. He could like transform into
Well,
something
no,
smaller.
it'd be Fast and Furious. You're a
Mm-hmm.
car,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a
Okay.
car heist, and then you transform.
Yeah,
You
we
go to
also did
space.
that
I don't know.
for.
So when the movie rights happen, it's gonna be Fast and the Furious and Ocean's 11 like mixed together.
I like doing. I kind of like doing my off-brand stuff where it's just
Yeah.
like this is the off-brand Ocean's 11, where we can wink and nod and we can do what we want with it, and because it's like when you have an actual IP. I've worked with IPs before, and they get super like they don't want to be flexible. So I'm just like, we're
Yeah.
gonna public domain this. We're gonna just kind of make our own version.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit more about the world. If no one's ever played Paperback, how would you describe that world? Like what's the
Well,
theme of the game itself?
okay, so I mean the story is we got into kind of this mid-century Hanna-Barbera look with my artist Ryan Goldsberry, and we
Okay.
developed a video game called Now Boarding. You go to nowboarding.us, you can see we're very inspired by the Saul Bass intro for the Catch Me If You Can movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And we followed that thread, and we developed a look and a feel to this like really fun 60s romp that was initially like all about kitschy novels, but then it transformed into, with Burgle Bros and Fugitive, into this movie universe. We call it the Burgle universe or whatever, and we have all of our characters cross
The
over because
Burgleverse. I like it.
yeah, and it's just fun. It's just like it's we can kind of do what we want with it. And the nice thing about using movie tropes is emotionally it gets people kind of in the mode for like, oh, this is how the game is going to make me feel. Or I get to live out whatever, the fantasy of this type of movie. Like, Burgle feels like a heist, Fugitive feels like Fugitive. And so like it's been fun to play on that with some of them, but then other ones there isn't a good fit. Like Paperback Adventures is more we're leaning on video game tropes with this.
Okay.
We're like, this is inspired by say Aspire and Gloomhaven and other kind of modern games. So inspirations come from different places, but we do have this fun universe for that we can pull from, and we're like when we're coming up with a game, we're definitely looking at the universe and like, okay, would this be the Burgle characters doing this? Like what I mean, like Sabotage is a good example. Like we're like, okay, we want to do Burgle, but we also kind of want to do this James Bond thing, but it still is a big stealth element. So what if like the Burgle Bros got called by the government to go after the supervillains? And so like,
Okay.
we're like, it sounds great. This is like we're just like our little kids with our toys, like, okay, and then he does this, and he's got a dinosaur that eat force field dogs. Like it's the whole, we're having fun with it.
So it sounds like what we need is some type of transforming organizational storage system for the whole Burgleverse where everything can kind of just I don't know, box together. I mean, boxes aren't my thing. They box together and then boom into one calyx cube that you can just slide in. And then when it comes
Yeah.
out, they all unfold and it makes noise.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing is, I mean, even before working with Noah, it's like I had a reputation because I was optimizing as an independent publisher for how shippable is the product, and then what's the present, like the shelf presence for the customer. I didn't care if it was like song and dancey. I look great on a game shelf because a lot of these games, they'll be big and they'll have all these different logos on them and the awards and everything, and they're mostly just trying to like pull shelf presence at a store.
Which
And
is
I don't
huge.
think that sacrificing like a clean looking, kind of artisanal box is worth gaining that attention at the store. Like literally, if you've seen my Fugitive box, it is a brown box. It's supposed to be a little briefcase, and it just says Fugitive very lightly on it. It disappears at like 5 feet away on the shelf, and I'm totally okay with it because I was trying to make it okay. It's shippable, and then like the players, because when you open it, it opens like a briefcase, and like it's a whole thing. And like my other ones are like buildings, and so I try to make them look, so I have a different set of forces of what I want for experience. It's like I want, and so I've gotten in trouble for how dense Burgle Bros is because the original Burgle Bros fits in this teeny box and it takes up a whole table when it covers. But getting it all back in the box, Tom Vassell had a whole video about how
Especially
hard
the
it was to
sleeves,
pack.
right?
He has a lot of videos about things like that. If
Not
he has a
even
problem with the
touching
game,
sleeves.
it's a whole video.
Yeah, it's fine.
Any
It's fine.
little thing.
So already, I mean, aligning with game trays and being like, okay, so now we can be efficient and we can take less space and we can, but not be impossible to pack. Because that was my problem. It's like I figured out how to get it all in,
Yeah.
but it wasn't the best user experience.
Okay.
We figure out how to pack it in.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally what you do, right? A lot of times when people come to Game Trace, it's literally a spreadsheet they fill out like, I have X amount of this, X amount of this, X amount of this. And then from there, I mean, what do you do with that? No, I mean, I've seen the spreadsheets come in. What is your process when you get a spreadsheet like that? So when Tim sent you this information in that spreadsheet, what did you do first?
So basically, we take every component in the spreadsheet. He fills out everything. Here's what's going to be in the game, or at least what we think is going to be in the game at this point. And we model it up 3D CAD style. Every component, every stack of cards, every stack of chips, every stack of pieces. And we model it up in one big world in CAD. And then we start, okay, this needs to go here, this needs to go here, this needs to go here. And then we build a tray around it. So we need to know about the game so that we put the right pieces in the right tray. And then once we figure that out by talking about the game and figuring out how it's played on the table, how you store it, how you want to play it, make things faster to open up and set up and also put away. Because, if you have a tray that holds every 15 different pieces in it and you have to open up 15 different Ziploc bags and pour them on the
Yeah.
table every time and then put those all back in individual baggies, you're maybe saving 5 or 6 minutes, but you're going to think about that the next time you play the game. And it's going to be like,
Don't need
it's
any
going to be
baggies.
10
Just get some
minutes.
X-trays.
This one I can just set up in 3 minutes. Doom, 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 done. So
Right.
we have to know about the game when we start. We take the components, model them up in 3D, every component, and then we start thinking, and then we build the tray around each piece or each set of pieces.
And what I think is different, maybe I'm wrong, but with my process is like I'll try to go to Noah early enough that he can be like, well, this is how this is going to fit, because very often companies will be like, well, this is what's in the box, make it fit.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, how well does this fit?
Exactly.
And does this work? Because
come to us soon enough. Yes, we can do.
Because if he can push back and say like, this is actually kind of hard, getting this to fit isn't really working, then I can be like, maybe I can change the game. Maybe I can actually alter the component count or what it's made out of, or I can change things, and that will shift it into to be cleaner. And so having it more of an open loop where I'm getting feedback from Noah, or on how things are fitting and how things are looking, and then I can adapt and be like, oh, that is a problem. It makes it so it's more synergistic instead of one directional. Instead of like, what was it called, waterfall development, where it's just like, okay, here's the things,
exactly.
Good luck.
We've worked with so many publishers, not just you, Tim, but Tim, also, we've worked with you in different stages of your project, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, the first one was mid-campaign. Hey, can you fix this for us? Or James Hudson on Grim Forest after the campaign, almost ready for production. Can you make a tray for us now? So we can do anything, but the most value you'll get is if you get in early so we could help you figure out cool things to do before you get to the point where everything's locked in.
That makes sense. Well, I promised you guys I wouldn't do 30 minutes, and we did 40 minutes. So I'm going to probably wrap it up here. I want to thank both of you, of course, for being here. Noah, you have to be here. I mean, it's kind of what you're here for.
Good job,
Tim, thank you so much for showing up. I want to say thank you to everybody in chat. There's a bunch of people here, and all the questions and the love and support for Fowers Games and Game Trayz. And if
Thanks.
anybody has any questions, they can definitely always leave them in the below. We'll answer them as time goes on. And if there's another design diary like this you'd like to see for a specific game, just let us know. And that's something that we can definitely go ahead and work on. So if that's it, I'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks.